Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel. Hopefully you're enjoying the bank holiday weekend. Unfortunately we're not working this bank holiday weekend as such. Usually we'll be here, there and everywhere working for organisations like English Heritage or National Trust or independent museums, for example. However, we're still working. Helen is busy tapping away doing the website as we speak. I'm doing repairs and ongoing making props, for example, in the shed and garage, and I'm also doing these videos for you. So today is another video on medieval medicine or medieval surgery specifically. And over the last few days we've looked at, for example, how to extract an arrow, how to deal with a head injury, sword cuts, that sort of thing. And if you go back even further, we've done several other videos, including one on the overview of medieval practitioners, medical practitioners, and prior to that we also did a thing all about trepanning, for example. This is as much your site as it is our site. So if you have any suggestions, any homework help, any homeschooling lessons that you want us to talk about, do get in touch. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, on here, or even contact us via email. I will draw your attention to our website also. It will be updated shortly, but if you want to and go on to schools or talks, look up what we offer for medicine. We also offer a huge amount for living history, for museums and heritage sites. Everything from a medieval wise woman to a Victorian surgeon, for example. We cover the whole reign. As many people often say, we are the one-stop shop. Anyway, on to today's video. Today we're going to look at amputations, and first of all, why would you amputate arm, leg, finger or whatever? Well, the truth is most amputations are usually a result of major trauma. And when we think of an amputation, we often think of medieval battles, for example, or any battle of whatever era that you're looking at. However, there was a huge amount of civilian people, normal people in towns and cities, that often required an amputation. And the main reason for that was down to hard living. There was a lot of manual work in the Middle Ages. Nothing was easy. You could be moving something could fall onto your arm, you could break a leg, you could even get hit and run over by a horse and cart. In which case, what would happen to your bone is it would be badly damaged. And what usually happens is not straight away, but several weeks later, several days later, infection could get set in and you could die of something as simple as a break. So in medieval terms, if there was a bone very badly broken, or in military medieval terms, there was a battle that resulted in major trauma, maybe a sword cut to the arm or leg, it would often result in an amputation. And in an age without anaesthetic, in an age with no major way of stopping bleeding, it was so important for the surgeon, the barber surgeon, to work incredibly fast. Later, by the Victorian era, it was often said a good surgeon could remove an arm or a leg in under a minute. Well, in medieval terms, that was also attempted, but often took a little bit longer, mainly because of the basic tools that you're using in the Middle Ages. But at first, if you can imagine I'm a surgeon, a barber surgeon, and someone's come in with a badly broken arm, I may try and mend it first. And we have evidence for that in the archaeological record. In other words, you would splint the limb. So pieces of wood, for example, would be strapped around the broken arm, maybe even an attempt to straighten the arm. But from an archaeological point of view, you do see bones that have basically reformed or regrown, and the bones are not straight at all. There was no good way of actually straightening and repairing a bone. So in this case, let's imagine the person will require an amputation. Now, amputations were quite horrific affairs, maybe even for the surgeon themselves to actually carry out. But the first thing that had to be done, and this is something that they knew about even as far back as the Romans and ancient Greeks, is there was a requirement to add a tourniquet, mainly because you don't want blood going absolutely everywhere and making it a harder job for the surgeon to work, because Blood, yes, it looks awful, but it will get in the way. You won't be able to really see what you're doing. So a tourniquet, maybe like this one, sometimes nothing more than a piece of rope, would have to go around the limb. Now, a word of warning, never put anything tight around a limb, especially not arms, legs, or even the neck. It's obvious, it really. Now, I'm not going to tighten this tourniquet up. If I was doing this for real, this tourniquet would have to be tight, and this would have to be above what you are going to remove. So if we're removing the lower arm, this would have to be above it, purely because you don't want the blood rushing down. You're keeping it up there basically. So this will be really, really tight. My assistant, who remember would be an apprentice to me, he would eventually run his own business or take on my business, would be holding the patient down, remember, usually in a seated position. You do see drawings, and I would advise you to go and look for them, of people sat in a chair, for example, having an arm or a leg removed. It is quite a common feature. No operating theatres, no one laid flat. Now, the worst part of the operation is about to happen, and that's because you have to cut through the surface of the skin, and it is said that this is the most painful bit. It really is. We have science backing this up now. Most of the nerve endings are actually in the skin and not necessarily in muscle, so it's going to be hurting a lot. The first cut is always the deepest, as I say. It's also the most painful. Now, if we have a straight knife, there's a lot of controversy about straight knives. If you have to cut around an arm or leg, you might not be able to get the two ends to meet up. They've thought of that. In the Middle Ages, they often used a knife like this, often referred to as a dismembering knife, because it's going to dismember a limb. And it's not sharp on the outer edge, it's only sharp on the inside. And it's very clever, because you're meant to go as far as you can around the limb, and therefore pushing it in. All you do then is literally drag and slide it around, and it will guarantee a complete circular cut of that arm or leg. Once you've done that, it was now the turn of a smaller knife like this one here, and this was literally to cut through the flesh down to the bone, because you need to be able to get to the bone so you can remove that limb. So this is literally defleshing, as it was sometimes referred to. Once that was done, yes, I'm afraid so, it's now the turn of the bone saw, and the bone saw would have been used literally to cut through that piece of bone. You do see in some comedies and even in some historical films, believe it or not, huge bone saws. Well, believe it or not, you only need a blade of about that size. It's not a big saw at all that you require. Even for a femur, your thigh bone, you do not need a really big knife for it. Now, once you've done that and the leg or arm has been removed, you must never remove the tourniquet yet, because you need to prevent bleeding. And unfortunately, the only way of controlling bleeding in the Middle Ages was taking, yes, you guessed it, a cauterizing iron. Now, you've seen these before, and there was lots of different shapes of these. This one is specifically for a stump, in other words, where you've removed an arm or leg. This would sit in the brazier again, the fire, whilst the operation is taking place, and this is used to touch those veins and arteries, sealing them. Once again, this often caused major problems because it killed off tissue, as I mentioned before. Not the best way of controlling bleeding, which is why it's not really done in that style anymore. Now, once you've done that, the surgeon will then be able to loosen the tourniquet bit by bit. The reason for this is he wants to make sure it's worked. And then naturally the skin and muscle will then sort of fold over the end of the bone, and that's what you want to happen. And then all you need to do is take your beeswax, if you were using that technique, a needle in thread, and then sew the skin over that wound. You can then add a dressing and a bandage, and hopefully they will recover from their injury. We do know, once again, from the archaeological record, that people did survive this operation. They didn't survive it for very long, usually, but they did survive. They didn't automatically all die when this operation was performed. But that is how you would remove an arm or a leg. Now, there are major problems with legs and arms being lost in the Middle Ages, and that usually meant that the person was, and it's sad to say, no good for his community. And that was down to the fact that life was full of hard labour. So you can imagine someone that's come back from a war, for example, with a missing arm or leg, is not going to be very useful around the home. And that's a shocking way of looking at it, but that's the truth in the Middle Ages. Luckily, some monasteries, some hospitals, remember, purely for the poor and the infirm, often took these people on to look after them when their communities often found that they weren't very useful as a man or a woman at that time. Now, operations are not just performed on arms and legs. Amputations do not just happen on arms and legs. They can also happen on things like broken fingers or damaged toes, and there was a lot of things being dropped on those in the Middle Ages. Now, there's several ways of dealing with digits and stuff as such, really. Fingers and toes could easily be removed with a set of bone pincers, literally to crunch down to remove the finger or toe. Or another technique which was often used because of its speed is literally the hammer and chisel, which sounds absolutely horrific but unbelievably fast. Once again, controlling the bleeding, and hopefully the patient will survive. So as you've seen in these 3 videos, and also in the other ones that we did previously, you will see that living in the Middle Ages was a pretty risky affair. Not only was there disease and wars, and also the possibility of you being killed or injured in some way in a nasty fight, because it was often said any bar fight in medieval times ended up with someone drawing a knife, and that's what one Venetian observer said about Britain. A bar fight could very easily end in multiple deaths. But the interesting thing is, if you were going to a surgeon, a barber surgeon for treatment, you were lucky to survive. And it's not really down to the skills of the barber surgeon, it's really down to the fact that infection is likely to set in. Nothing was sanitary in the Middle Ages, not even general living as such, really. So hopefully this has given you a bit more information on what it was like to live in the Middle Ages and get medieval medicine. Now, a little task for everyone: if you want to suggest some other topics, please do. Miss Withers, if you've got anything else you want me to cover, I can do that. If you want to look at the humours, for example, do let us know. But we cover any age in history, from the Stone Age all the way up to the 1950s, male and female roles. We also do military and civilian stuff, rich and poor. So literally, if you want a video on any topic between that time span, do let us know. We have lots and lots of props in our store. We can bring them in, talk about them. And remember, we try and do some local history, some crafts. Now, after the big V-Day crafts that we've done, we've given that a bit of a rest at the moment. And obviously, Helen's famous cookery. We have lots of plans for that in the near future. Anyway, on that note, enjoy the bank holiday weekend. Don't get going to the seaside. Stay in your garden. Have fun. Relax. It's quite sunny at the moment, even though it's windy. And we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.